Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a fun spin on all the news in the world that you need to know about. My name is, of course, Jacob Paveo, and I come to you from the beautiful, sunny, but yet always Great White North, each and every Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, fresh for you to download and listen to during work, after work, on your way home from work, maybe download it later on, listen on the weekend. Either way, available on all of your favorite podcasting sources. If it's your first time here, welcome to the show. If you have yet to do so, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Leave us reviews, likes, thumbs up if you're over on YouTube, whatever the review process happens to be, because every single podcasting platform seems to do it a little bit differently. This week, I'm not going to take much time to get into it because, honestly, I'm short on time. But the two stories we're going to be covering are fairly big. So the story we're going to get to later is our main story for the week, and it's all about the Catholic Church and their current position on U.S. President Joe Biden. So some crazy things are happening there. But the first story is one actually that happened on Monday of this week. And throughout the week, I've been following it. Some further stories have come out. It's not really a big story, but it's one that's really worth talking about. So it is that a man wielding a knife was yelling threats and apparently attempting to enter the home of Ontario Premier Doug Ford's house. So I'm going to read to you from Global News. This is written by Gabby Rodriguez. And she says, Premier Doug Ford's office said a man allegedly equipped with a large butcher knife showed up outside his Etobicoke home and was arrested by an Ontario provincial police officer. Ivana Yelich, Ford's director of media relations, told Global News the man was allegedly yelling threats Monday night. Yelich also said an OPP officer was on site nearby and arrested the man a short time later. Quote, the premier thanks the officer for his quick action and bravery, which resulted in no harm to anyone involved in the incident, end quote, she said in a statement. Ford's house has been the site of protests before, as we've noted here on the podcast. In late November, Ford commented that, quote, every single day there were protesters outside my home. He further called them buffoons, which is pretty typical language for him. He ended up saying this time, quote, I have the best neighbors anyone could ever ask for. They didn't sign up for this. They aren't making decisions for the government. It is totally unfair. It's unacceptable that they have to put up with this because they're living beside the premier, end quote. Toronto Police Acting Chief James Raymer said he spoke with the commissioner of the OPP about the incident on Tuesday, and added that he is, quote, very concerned about it, later saying that it was an unfortunate incident. Now, this is important to talk about for a few reasons, because in Canada we have one political assassination that's ever happened, and it was done by the FLQ, the Front de Libération Québec, who are the separatist group, actually back when Trudeau Sr. was in office, and they were a terrorist organization who kidnapped and murdered a politician at the time. But other than that, there really is no major threat against Canadian politicians. I mean, I know a few people who have literally come across the Prime Minister by accident. And I mean, there's stories like this posted all the time. I happen to know two different people who have happened upon him in the Ottawa area, like just walking around, at a picnic or something, and you just kind of like bump into him, and there's obviously security around him. The RCMP is in charge of his safety, but it is definitely not obvious. So it's a really, really interesting thing that we're starting to see because of the current political climate, where even, like in the U.S., a senator, which is essentially the American equivalent of what Premier Doug Ford is to us, you can't get close to a senator. They have secure, like 24-hour security detail and all this, which Doug Ford does have, but it's not to the extent. So essentially, the Ontario Provincial Police have an officer who is permanently stationed at the home, and then there is a group as well with the OPP that are in charge of actual personnel security for him and his family, as there should be. Now, in this case, he and his family members happened to not be home, so there was just the one officer stationed at his house for obvious security reasons. So the really, really crazy thing to me is how this has been escalating, because Canadian politics is something that it's always been discussed as sort of a back burner issue. And that may actually surprise a lot of people, but it just has. And even people who are really into politics, like myself, probably can't name 20 different members of federal parliament. Like, probably not. Maybe 20 is a low number. But it's not like in the U.S. where if you follow politics, you can name every major committee member and, the different legislations that are being debated. Canadian politics just doesn't operate that way in the public vernacular, I guess. It's not discussed, partly because I think our government, although many people would argue they have significantly more control, which actually I would argue as well, that they have significantly more control over us than, say, the American government, it is much less shaky. It's much more stable and secure. So, for example, we don't have executive authority. Our elected politicians cannot create an executive order passing something into law without it requiring a vote in Parliament. We can't do that. Whereas in the U.S., there are certain legislations that can be pushed through by the executive, that being the president, or at the state level by the senator, without it going through a vote in the House. So what makes this story super interesting to me is that it actually appears like Canadian politics is taking it, or has taken, a giant leap forward in the public's eye, of public perception, so that people are really focusing on it, to the point that the crazy people are starting to go after our provincial leaders. Now, of course, because everyone's locked in their house, people have their attention drawn towards the news screen, right? And that's simply a result of the coronavirus, right? No fault of any politician or whatnot. But what I take from this story is more than just this one-off crazy guy attacked, or attempted to attack. He slashed the tires of 11 cars on the street, and then approached the front door waving the knife and yelling, and somehow the officer was able to get him to drop the knife and take him into custody. But the part that really has me is that OPP acting chief, this is Toronto Police acting chief, who said that he's very concerned about this particular case. Now, those words are much heavier than because he did finish by saying it's an unfortunate incident. Usually that's the sort of language they would use. But for a chief of police to say that he's very concerned about this, it tells us that they probably have intel that there are others who are feeling similar and willing to act in an aggressive nature, to the extent that they're actually willing to go to these politicians' homes. And since this guy did it, maybe they think more will attempt the same. And that, to me, is one of the most fascinating developments in Canadian politics in a very, very long time, is that suddenly people care. And I mean, the people who were protesting at his house, these are youth who statistically, most of them didn't vote, which is insane that they care this much now about politics. Because you can look at the provincial elections and the numbers of people who vote in provincial elections. It's not even remotely close to a federal election, and our federal elections are way, 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 way low. Way low. Let's actually look it up so we can use an actual number. It's really hard to type something different than you're actually saying. Voter turnout at federal elections. Let's not look at 1867. So in 2019, it's actually much higher than I thought it was. So 67% of Canadians voted, eligible Canadians voted in the 2019 federal election. 2015 was 68% and 61% in 2011. And that's actually more in line with what you would expect. But that's crazy, actually. 70% voted in the federal election. Let's look at Ontarians who vote. Because these sort of statistics, what they tell us is that basically there's always going to be crazy people. The problem is when the crazy people are actively involved in 56% voter turnout in Ontario, which is significantly lower, 17% lower than the federal average, and it's basically half of people. But then you have everyone who's upset about it. So what we end up having right now is crazy people with nothing to do but watch the news, and now they're feeling motivated to action because of the increase in protest. And I mean, even illegal protests, like the anti-mask protests that are, they're blatantly illegal. You're not allowed public assembly right now, especially not without face coverings and masks. And that is for, as someone who is extremely on the side of personal liberty when it comes to protest, this, to me, is it makes sense that this is illegal. And I don't think anyone can give me an argument otherwise. And I think the Black Lives Matter marches last summer should have had the exact same repercussions to the organizers as the people who organized the anti-mask rallies. Sorry, but it's just true that if it's illegal for public assembly and you're targeting certain types of people assembling in the public, well, then you have to target all of them. And the Black Lives Matter leaders who assembled those protests should have also been charged in kind. And all it was they were drawn into the local police station and given a fine, because that's all they can do. So give the BLM leaders a fine, and they'll raise money to pay for it, just like the anti-maskers did. And that's what they should have done. But that's an aside. The problem is that because you have all of this assembly happening and all of these people focusing on politics, you start getting a lot of people who maybe don't understand how politics works, especially in a Canadian market where you can get very easily confused between Canadian and American politics. And that, to me, is the biggest concern, because I've heard people argue against me before using points that are based in American policy and American politics. So we discussed last week the notwithstanding clause that Doug Ford's government has just used to push through a campaign spending bill that will benefit him in the next election. This is not the same. It's absolutely not the same as using executive action and signing an executive order into law in the United States, right? This is a legal act that he has used our Constitution to pass something through by vote because it was still voted on. And I have heard people arguing that this is the same as the executive order that would be used in the United States. And it's simply not, because the problem is we elected 40% of our Ontario Legislative Assembly is conservative. And so the Conservative Party has control, and the Conservative Party is the ones who pass these things through. Right? So it's quite crazy, actually, that it's being so confused and it's being muddled. And when you have people who have mental disabilities who are clearly being influenced by what they think they understand and what the internet has convinced them of, you can get these sort of crazy moments where someone goes off the edge and attempts to attack a political leader. And in Canada, we are not prepared for that. You know, it's very difficult to get to the premier or the prime minister if you intend harm, but it's not impossible. Like I said at the beginning, I literally know people who have been like on a run and ran by the prime minister, and then he's just kind of being chased by like 3 guys in suits. And I'm sure there are other security guards and stuff that, you know, he just didn't notice while he was running by. But it's just a fact that it's like, if you intend harm to these people, they're actually much easier to access than they probably should be. And what about lower level politicians? Because that's where it usually starts. And that's what I'm concerned about now, is that we'll see a member of parliament or a member of provincial parliament or even a municipal leader in one of our major cities, not even a major city, but just a big city, attacked because of these sorts of things. So I am definitely worried about that. But on to our second story, and that is regarding Joe Biden and the Catholic Church. This is a flip now out of Canadian politics into American politics, and this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And I'm going to try and explain it in as simple a way that I can, because I could talk for hours about it, but honestly I don't want to, because you'll probably get bored. Essentially, the Catholic Church in the United States has decided that President Joe Biden, who is the second Roman Catholic president after, of course, John F. Kennedy, they have decided, or they debated a decision to not allow Joe Biden to receive the sacrament of Holy Communion, which, if you were not raised in the church, that is basically the dry bread that they eat. The unleavened bread. And they debated this for a long time, apparently, last week, and the church was completely split on whether or not he should or should not be allowed to receive communion at church every Sunday, because he and his government support legal abortions. And he signed a bill recently, or he renewed a bill recently, that provides funding for federal abortions. Now, politically, this goes much deeper, because Joe Biden, even as Barack Obama's vice president, was against federal funding for abortion. It wasn't until 2019 that he flipped on that while he was running. And now that he's re-signed this bill into law, he renewed it. It means it was renewed in his federal budget, so the funding is still going from the federal government to abortion clinics across the country. It was the Catholic Church took a heavy stand against this. Now, I don't think I've ever talked about my pro-choice or pro-life views, though they're probably pretty obvious. But I have long been pro-choice. I've even gone so far as to say that under the right circumstances, I'm pro-abortion because, like, it's not for me, but I don't think that the world needs more children who are unwanted and ultimately in situations where they may feel or literally be unloved. And that just, that's my personal opinion. But your opinions on abortion actually shouldn't matter in this. And a lot of the media coverage has been centered around the individual on air. It's been centered around their position on abortion. And if you're against abortion, then you think this is good that the Catholic Church is having their say. And if you are pro-choice, then you are saying the Catholic Church is wrong. Well, I actually choose to come at this from a different perspective because as an accountant, I understand the legal status given to charitable organizations and churches that makes them tax-free. Now, this becomes really, really complicated. And I've actually, I was up very late last night thinking about this, trying to really come to a conclusion. And I've had difficulty doing so. Because a church is granted tax-free status as any other charitable organization because the idea is the money that is donated to them is refunded back into the community. So obviously they upkeep their buildings and they pay, like, the priest and whatever will make a little bit of money, and anyone who maybe works for, like, they'll have administrators, especially larger churches will have administrators and whatnot, and you have to pay them, which no one would argue that you have to pay people for their jobs, especially like the priest might be given like a house and food and stuff and maybe not a salary. But like if you have someone coming in and doing admin work Monday to Friday, you definitely need to pay that person. But beyond that, basically everything else that comes in is supposed to be cycled back through the community. So it goes to outreach programs. Here we have very cold winters and a lot of churches are open at night for homeless people to like warming centers and homeless shelters. And they do, clothing and donations and drives and soup kitchens. And they do a lot of positive things in their community. And that's why they're granted tax-free status. But part of tax-free status is that you so organizations, any business, including a charitable organization and a church, is viewed as a person under law. The term is person. And any person who is granted charitable, tax-free, or clergy status is not allowed to use that tax-free funding to influence politics. It's part of the deal. So that's why lobbying groups are not considered charitable organizations. They are groups that you donate to, but they are not charities under law. I think they are granted a tax-free status, but it is not the same as a church or a charitable organization. And of course, lobbying groups are collective organizations that they work directly with politicians trying to get laws passed for, like, for example, there is a lobbying group for video game companies. There's a lobbying group for like wheat farmers and dairy farmers and butchers and slaughterhouses, and every industry you can imagine has a lobbying group. But by agreeing to being a tax-free organization, the church agrees that they will not use their funding to influence politics. So, does that mean that they can tell the President of the United States that he cannot receive the sacrament of communion at church because of his presidential opinion on abortion? Really, really interesting. So legally, I've looked through it. I've read some opinions. It seems like legally they are allowed to do this because they're not telling him he can't come to church. So it actually would be illegal for the church. It could be illegal because he's the president for a church to tell the president that he is not allowed in any of their buildings because of a decision he made in legislature. That would likely be illegal. However, they're not banning him. They're not telling him he can't come. They're just saying that this one aspect of our religion, which is also his religion, he will no longer be able to participate in because of his decision to support federally funded abortions. Now, this is completely split across the U.S. throughout different bishops. It's the archbishops or whatever that were debating this, and they're like the local leaders of the church. And what they ultimately decided is each bishop will decide if, and this isn't just Joe Biden, it's all federal politicians, but they will have to decide on their own if they will allow those politicians to receive communion or not. Now, to me, again, looking at this from strictly the perspective of an accountant who sees the reason they were granted that tax-free status, which is something that I think is very debatable when it comes to churches, and I would have no problem taxing churches because they operate more as a business than as a charitable organization, in my opinion, and they are not for the community as a whole, in my opinion. However, I really, really think that this goes beyond what the agreement under law that was made, that they will not use their status as a church and the financial benefits provided therein to influence politics in any way. So they're allowed to have conversations with voters. They're allowed to openly influence voters. Like, they're technically allowed to do that. There is debate there, but I think technically they are allowed to do that under law. The problem here is they are trying to clearly influence the president, very clearly. And I think this is almost a case-by-case issue, and I have no problem taking this with a case-by-case issue. This actually came up in 2004 with then candidate John Kerry. It was a different issue. It wasn't abortion, but it was I think it was all the child molestation stuff that was happening, and John Kerry wanted to open an investigation into it, and they basically threatened a similar thing against him. It didn't end up happening, but it seems like this with Joe Biden, who is actually the president, because, of course, if you recall, John Kerry lost to Barack Obama. That's why probably none of you remember John Kerry. But in this case, Joe Biden's the president of the United States, and you have a church who is denying him access, a church he's already a part of, because that's the difference. The protection here under law is that if, I'm trying to think. So, like, if I was to walk into a Jewish temple, there are certain things that I would not be allowed to just do, right, on day one as a visitor, right? There's certain things you can't do. Like, you can't try and give a reading in front of everyone because I don't speak the language, right? There are certain things that you need to be a part of the community to do. And in the Catholic Church, the sacraments are those things, communion being the steady one that happens every week. And that's what they're hiding behind, because they say, well, no, we don't allow anyone to come. You have to meet our credentials to be able to be given the sacrament of communion. Now, the problem I have with that is that rapists and murderers in prison who repent are allowed to have that sacrament while in prison. And literal murderers who literally killed a whole bunch of people are allowed the sacrament of communion in prison, in some places, many places actually. But for some reason, the President of the United States, for supporting abortion, is not. Even though he has said quite openly that he personally doesn't agree with it, but this is his position as a federal politician. And so I don't like the Catholic Church taking what I think is a stretch to try and influence federal politics. And I would go so far as to say that this should, although it won't, but it should, in my opinion, threaten their tax-free status, and it should likely, again, in my opinion, be removed. But that is all we have for today. So thank you so much for tuning in and sticking with me until the end. I know, no interstitials, no guitar parts, nothing like that this week. I had to get this episode recorded and out quick. But once again, thank you so much. Feel free to take these conversations with me and with your friends and family out in the real world and over on social media. Of course, all of my social media links can be found in the description to this episode. Once again, every single Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, you can find me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach me using the contact page at the website, which is www.laughtolearnpodcast.com. Also, don't forget laughtolearnpodcast.com/store for all the cool merch. I actually just got my my white t-shirt for the summer, and I'm going to order another 2 of them because they're actually really sick. So our t-shirts, they are made in the United States with fabric that is made in Ecuador. So it's all through democratically elected nations, of course, and that pay fair wages to their employees, not their employers, the employees rather. And so feel free to check it out. It's all super high quality stuff. I absolutely love it. I hope you will too. Until next time, friends. You know what I'm about to say. Don't forget to keep washing your hands, keep social distancing, keep wearing your masks, keep getting those vaccinations. Hopefully most people are almost at their second one. Mine's not until the end of September. Hopefully it gets pushed up. But anyways, keep on laughing and keep on learning.